Imagine waking up to the news that the world's most powerful country is pulling back its diplomatic footprint across an entire continent. That's the reality facing Africa today, as reports swirl that President Donald Trump's administration is preparing to shut down U.S. embassies and consulates in multiple African countries. The news is sending shockwaves through diplomatic circles, business communities, and everyday citizens alike. But in a twist that has left many stunned, the U.S. is simultaneously investing over $500 million to build its largest consulate in the world, right in the heart of Lagos, Nigeria's Eko Atlantic City. What's really happening with America's Africa strategy? Is this a sign of retreat, a calculated pivot, or something else entirely? Let's break it all down, and as you watch, let me know in the comments. Is the U.S. abandoning Africa, or is it simply changing the rules of engagement? First, let's talk about the headlines that have everyone buzzing. According to multiple leaked documents and draft executive orders, the Trump administration is considering a sweeping overhaul of the U.S. State Department, one that would see the closure of nearly 30 embassies and consulates worldwide, with Africa bearing the brunt of these cuts. At least 6 embassies in Africa, located in the Central African Republic, Eritrea, Gambia, Lesotho, the Republic of Congo, and South Sudan, are reportedly on the chopping block, along with key consulates in places like Douala, Cameroon, and Durban, South Africa. The Bureau of African Affairs, the office that has long overseen U.S. policy for Sub-Saharan Africa, is set to be dissolved entirely, replaced by a much smaller Special Envoy office reporting directly to the White House. If these plans go forward, the impact will be immediate and far-reaching. For millions of Africans, simple tasks like applying for a U.S. visa could become a logistical nightmare, requiring expensive travel to neighboring countries just to access basic consular services. For governments, the loss of direct diplomatic engagement could mean less support for development projects, humanitarian aid, and peacekeeping efforts. For American businesses, it could mean fewer opportunities and more hurdles to accessing Africa's rapidly growing markets. And for the U.S. itself, critics warn that this move risks ceding ground to rivals like China and Russia, who have been expanding their own diplomatic and economic influence across the continent. So why is the Trump administration considering such a dramatic pullback? The answer, at least according to the leaked drafts, centers on the America First strategic doctrine. The idea is to streamline U.S. foreign policy, cut costs, and focus on what the administration sees as core strategic interests. The new approach would prioritize counterterrorism, critical resource extraction, and trade, while slashing programs related to climate change, democracy promotion, human rights, and refugee support. The plan also calls for major layoffs at the State Department, new hiring standards that require alignment with the president's foreign policy vision, and a shift toward deploying diplomats for targeted mission-driven assignments rather than maintaining a broad, permanent presence. But here's where things get really interesting, and frankly, confusing. Even as the U.S. prepares to scale back its diplomatic presence in much of Africa, it is pouring unprecedented resources into a single location, Lagos, Nigeria. In the glittering, ultra-modern district of Eko Atlantic City, construction is underway on what will be the largest U.S. consulate in the world. This $537 million project, sprawling across 12.2 acres of prime real estate, is set to open by 2027 and will serve as a hub for American diplomacy, business, and culture in West Africa. Why Lagos? Why now? The answer lies in Nigeria's unique position as Africa's largest economy, its most populous country, and a critical partner for the U.S. in everything from energy and trade to counterterrorism and cultural exchange. The new consulate is designed to handle over 100,000 visa applications annually, support booming bilateral trade, and provide state-of-the-art services for American citizens and businesses. It's a clear signal that, while the U.S. may be downsizing elsewhere, it sees Nigeria as too important to ignore. The Eko Atlantic project isn't just about diplomacy, it's about making a statement. The consulate will feature cutting-edge green technologies, extensive security measures, and facilities for cultural events, business forums, and educational exchanges. It's expected to create thousands of jobs for Nigerians during construction and operation, inject nearly $100 million into the local economy, and boost Lagos's status as a global business hub. For property investors and local businesses, the arrival of the world's largest U.S. consulate is a game-changer, driving up real estate values and attracting multinational companies to the area. But for many Africans, the symbolism is hard to ignore. On one hand, the U.S. is honoring Nigeria with a diplomatic facility of unprecedented scale and sophistication. On the other, it's closing embassies in countries that desperately need American engagement, places where U.S. missions have played vital roles in supporting democracy, stability, and development. Is this a case of putting all your eggs in one basket? Or is it a pragmatic strategy, focusing resources where they'll have the biggest impact? I want to know what you think. Does the Lagos consulate signal a deeper commitment to Africa, or is it just a shiny distraction from a broader retreat? Let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. For decades, U.S. embassies across Africa have been more than just buildings. They've been lifelines. They've provided emergency assistance, supported local NGOs, facilitated trade, and helped mediate conflicts. In countries like South Sudan and the Central African Republic, U.S. diplomats have been on the front lines of peacekeeping and humanitarian efforts. In places like Lesotho and the Republic of Congo, they've helped foster economic development and public health initiatives. The closure of these missions could leave vulnerable nations even more isolated at a time when global challenges like terrorism, pandemics, and climate change demand more cooperation, not less. And then there's the question of global competition. As the U.S. scales back, China is ramping up. Beijing has opened dozens of new embassies and consulates across Africa in recent years, pouring billions into infrastructure, mining, and technology projects. Russia, too, has been expanding its diplomatic and security footprint, courting African leaders and offering military training and arms deals. Many analysts warn that the U.S. risks losing its influence on the continent if it withdraws now, leaving the field open for rivals with very different values and priorities. The Trump administration's defenders argue that the closures are about efficiency and focus, not abandonment. They point out that many embassies and consulates handle relatively low volumes of business, and that regional hubs can provide services more cost-effectively. They also argue that a leaner, more agile diplomatic corps, one that's closely aligned with the president's vision, will be better equipped to tackle today's fast-moving challenges. But critics counter that diplomacy is about relationships, trust, and presence. Once an embassy is closed, it's hard to rebuild those connections, and the costs of disengagement can be far higher than any savings on paper. There's also a human dimension to this story. For ordinary Africans, the closure of U.S. embassies and consulates means longer waits and higher costs for visas, fewer opportunities for educational and cultural exchange, and less access to American support in times of crisis. For American citizens living or working in these countries, it means fewer resources and less protection. For local staff who have worked at U.S. missions for years, it could mean lost jobs and shattered livelihoods. And what about the future? The draft executive orders are just that, drafts. There's still uncertainty about whether all of these closures will actually happen. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has publicly dismissed some of the reports as fake news, and the State Department has not confirmed which embassies or consulates, if any, will ultimately be shut down. There's also pushback from Congress, the diplomatic community, and business leaders who see Africa as a land of opportunity, not just a cost center to be trimmed. Yet the underlying message is clear. U.S. foreign policy toward Africa is at a crossroads. The continent is home to some of the world's fastest-growing economies, youngest populations, and most dynamic tech scenes. It's also a region facing immense challenges, from conflict and poverty to climate change and health crises. The choices the U.S. makes now about where to invest, where to engage, and where to pull back will shape its role in Africa for decades to come. So, what does all this mean for Africans, Americans, and the world? Is the U.S. retreating from Africa, or simply recalibrating its approach? Will the new mega consulate in Lagos serve as a beacon of partnership or a fortress of selective engagement? And how will other African countries respond to being left out of America's diplomatic embrace? These are questions that don't have easy answers, but they're too important to ignore. As we watch the story unfold, I want to hear from you. Do you think the U.S. is making a mistake by closing embassies across Africa? Or is it right to focus on key partners like Nigeria? How will these changes affect your country, your business, or your community? And what should African leaders do in response? Seek new alliances, double down on regional cooperation, or push back against what some see as American neglect? Jump into the comments and let's get this conversation started. In the end, diplomacy is about more than buildings and budgets. It's about people, relationships, and the values we share. Whether the U.S. is building bridges or burning them in Africa remains to be seen. But one thing is certain. The world is watching, and the next moves will define the future of U.S.-Africa relations for years to come. Stay tuned, stay engaged, and don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth analysis on the stories that matter most.